Steel City. Is everybody ready to go? Let's proclaim the greatest radio show.
Welcome, fans, to the Week 13 Fantasy Show. I'm your host, Jim Sella, here with Jay Dash. This is the last regular season for a lot of leagues in fantasy football. The playoffs start usually around Week 14 or 15 for most fantasy leagues. I think some of them actually run till the end of the season or maybe into the playoffs. I think that's pretty lame.
No, not into the playoffs, but to the end of the season, yeah. I mean, your fantasy goes, 14, 15, 16. Some go 15, 16, 17.
Believe it. And I'm in second place and fifth or sixth place.
Very nice, man.
What do we got on the docket today?
Well, we're going to go with our situational starters first. As usual, we average 15.35 points per non-quarterback. And we're going to start off with your guy and going up against your team.
Yeah, I'm going to take Sterling Shepard going up against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh gives up the fourth fewest points to fantasy wide receivers, which is kind of surprising given how their pass defense has struggled a lot this season. I think Sterling Shepard provides a good matchup for the Giants against Pittsburgh. He's going to be coming out of the slot. He's a little bigger than Willie Gay. He's a lot younger than Willie Gay, so I think he'd be able to give him some fits. Do I think Shepard's going to go out and have some huge game, buck 53 touchdowns? No. But I think he's going to be a guy to get some catches. Cockrell and Burns have been doing a good job shutting receivers down on the outside. So I think that slot receiver is going to get a good look. And I know Shepard doesn't play only in the slot, but you'll see him there a lot. I think the Steelers will be focusing on Odell Beckham a lot, trying to double or triple team him. So that's going to leave things wide open for some of these other wide receivers. And the Giants don't run the ball very well, so you know Eli's going to be slinging it around out there, and he's a good quarterback. And we've seen how the Steelers have struggled against Mannings in the past. Maybe not so much Eli, but definitely Peyton. So let's see if maybe we can get the best of this Manning and the Steelers win the game. But I still think Sterling Shepard gets the best of the Steelers defense when it goes to fantasy points.
Well, you said Eli would throw 4 touchdowns in his game in the Steelers segment, so those touchdowns got to go somewhere, and it's not going to all be Odell Beckham Jr. But if you look, Sterling Shepard had double-digit fantasy points in 3 straight games to start the season. Looked really good as a rookie coming into his first action. Then he slumped a little bit. He went 4 straight games in single digits, actually, but he bounced back with 3 straight games finding the end zone in weeks 9 through 11. And actually, in week 11, he had a season-high 11 targets. Then you go into last weekend at Cleveland. Looks like a pretty good matchup for him. And Eli Manning did not even target him in that game. He actually had to apologize to him after the game and said he made a mistake and said he'll correct the mistake this week. So that means to me he's going to look more often than usual towards Sterling Shepard to try to fix what he did last weekend. And I think Sterling Shepard can come up with a big game. And let's not forget, Odell Beckham Jr. is not 100% right now.
Believe that.
I'm going to go with Kansas City wide receiver Tyreek Hill going up against Atlanta. It's in Atlanta. They led up the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers. This guy has been balling recently. He has double-digit fantasy points in 5 of his last 6 games. In 3 of those games, he scored 20 or more. And since Macklin's injury, he's really taken advantage of becoming the top receiver for Alex Smith out there. And even if Macklin does return this week, next week, whatever it is, Tyreek Hill should remain the number 1 guy out there because he's been playing so well. He can also do it in the kick return game, so if you get points there, that's great. And it looks like they're going to give him a carry or 2 each week. He actually had a rushing touchdown last week as well. So Tyreek Hill is doing it big, and now he has a very good matchup going up against the defense that isn't that great versus the run or the pass at this point. And the offense for Atlanta scores points, so KC might have to go out and pass a lot in this game. And a running back for the Detroit Lions, Theo Riddick, going into New Orleans this week. They led up the 6th most fantasy points to running backs. He has at least 4 receptions in all but 1 game this season. He has double-digit fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games and at least 9 points in every game played this season. Now, he did miss a game or 2 earlier in the year. But this is a game where New Orleans, they're not very good against running backs. They can't stop the run very well, and they get beaten by the pass too. So Theo Riddick can do it in both facets of the game. And New Orleans, we know, can put up points. So Matt Stafford might have to pass it around in this game, and Theo Riddick is going to come up with that 4 receptions or more again this week. And I think he's actually going to have a big week.
I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, Detroit and New Orleans this week.
Yeah, I will say Detroit's defense has been very good recently. I think 20 points or less in 5 straight games, but the competition has been nowhere near what New Orleans offense has been this season. So I think New Orleans is going to go out there and put up points, and I think Matt Stafford can come close to matching them at least.
Stafford's having a very efficient season.
All right, our sleepers, we are averaging 12.78 points per non-quarterback. Who are you going with?
I'm going to take Tyler Boyd. A, he's on my fantasy team, and I need him to do good. B, he's going up against the Eagles, and they give up the 13th most points to fantasy wide receivers. A.J. Green's out. Giovanni Bernard's out. Tyler Eifert's back in, and they are targeting him a little bit, but not as much as they have in seasons past. Brandon, I've fallen and I can't get up, has pretty much fallen on his face and isn't really doing anything out there. I think Tyler Boyd's going to be the playmaker for Cincinnati going on for the rest of the year. And Cincinnati wants to end the year on a positive note. They've had a terrible year. I jinxed them at the beginning of the year and said they were going to be garbage. I ended up being right, one of the few times that actually happened. But Cincinnati needs to see what they have opposite of A.J. Green, especially since, the injury that he had at the time that he had, he may not be ready for week 1 of the NFL next year. So Boyd's going to need to get some reps in. I think he has a good chance to put up points. And, I mean, he's a shifty guy. We've seen him play in Pitt. He's not the biggest. He's not the strongest. He's not the fastest. But somehow this guy gets open and he puts points on the board.
Yeah, with A.J. Green out, he has 17 targets over the last 2 games, stepping into the number 1 wide receiver role. Like you mentioned, Tyler Eifert, not target him quite as much as last season, but he is coming off injury. He started the season. Was he on the IR to start the season? I can't even remember, but he wasn't playing for most of the season. He's actually come back and looked pretty decent. I know you got some big points out of him here and there, but Tyler Boyd, definitely the number 1 target out there in terms of wide receivers in Cincinnati. He scored his first TD in his last home game as well in week 11 versus Buffalo. So coming back home versus Philly, I actually think Cincinnati's going to win this game, and Tyler Boyd's going to be a big part of that.
I agree, Cincinnati all the way. In this game, anyway.
Believe it. All right, another wide receiver, Mohamed Sanu for the Atlanta Falcons. They're going up against KC. This game's in Atlanta. KC is the worst in the league against fantasy wide receivers this season, and they do a good job at stopping the run. So I think Matt Ryan's going to have to pass in this game, obviously, and he's shown all season he can do that. Now, Mohamed Sanu, he's been inconsistent. Although Julio Jones hasn't necessarily put up big points every single week either. He's been a little bit inconsistent as well. You look, Mohamed Sanu, though, 4 double-digit fantasy performances in his last 6 games. So he's starting to pick it up a little bit. And look, over his last 2 home games, 18 targets, 17 receptions, 149 yards, and a touchdown. So he's been playing a lot better at home recently. And with Julio not having a big week last week, he came up with 14 fantasy points as well. So I think Julio's going to blow up this week, actually, and there's going to be enough for Mohamed Sanu to do something as well, because I think KC's going to be able to at least limit Atlanta's run game, and they're going to be passing out there, and it's going to have to be more than just Julio Jones. So I think Sanu's going to come up and have a solid game at least.
Do I drop Rob Gronkowski?
I heard something about 8 weeks.
Yeah, he's out indefinitely. He's having back surgery.
Yeah, so, yeah, you have to, man. There's no reason to hold him. I mean, if it's possible he can come back and there's nothing out there, you might as well just keep him stashed at the bottom of your bench. But if there's something out there that you could use, there's no problem right now dropping Rob Gronkowski.
I dropped him. Should I pick up Kyle Rudolph or Ladarius Green?
I say Ladarius Green. See what he has, man. I think even if it's not this week, I don't know if you need a tight end bad this week, but if you can just sit a guy on your bench for a week or two, I think Ladarius Green's a good option.
Tyreek Hill or Corey Coleman? Who should I have on my team?
Tyreek Hill. This guy has been balling recently, and he's the best playmaker on that offense right now, along with Spencer Ware, maybe. Spencer Ware's having a pretty good season, but Tyreek Hill, man, this guy, they were saying he's the fastest guy in the NFL. He's still young, and he's growing each week. You can tell this guy is one of the main pieces in this offense. My other sleeper is New York Jets running back Bilal Powell going up against Indy this week. They led up the 10th most fantasy points to running backs. He's been up and down all season long, obviously. He's the backup to Matt Forte. He had just 4 fantasy points last week coming out of a bye, and that's after having 21 fantasy points in their previous game. He had 7 catches for 52 yards and a touchdown in that game. He's more of an asset in the passing game, obviously, and Indianapolis ranks 30th in football in passing yards allowed, so they get torched in the passing game. And if you remember last week, Indy's front 7 got manhandled by Pittsburgh's offensive line as well. So I think Forte and Bilal Powell can both get it done on the ground, and I think they can both get it done in the air in this game as well.
Who do I play? Tyrell Williams, Tyler Boyd, Sterling Shepard, or Cole Beasley?
I'm going to go with Williams, man. I know he's banged up right now. He got something wrong with his shoulder. That's the one problem there, but he's been doing it big recently. He's actually the number 1 target out there for Phillip Rivers. And the San Diego Chargers have been putting up a ton of yardage offensively this season. So I go with Williams for sure.
Ball.
Now just keep an eye out, though. If he's still hurting going into game time and they're saying his snaps may be limited a little bit, you may want to back off of that. And then you said who else? Tyler Boyd, Cole Beasley, and who?
Sterling Shepard.
Yeah, so Sterling Shepard, I'd keep him in the wings in case Williams is going to be limited.
Word.
All right, let's move on to our deep sleepers here. We are averaging 11.42 points per non-quarterback. It's tough for our deep sleepers. I pick pretty crappy players, so 11.42 points ain't that bad. Oh, let's see what we did with our quarterbacks as well, because you were taking one. We're averaging 15 points per non-quarterback. We actually done pretty well with quarterbacks outside the first one we picked, which was Jay Cutler, who got 3 points and got injured in that game.
Yeah, he's garbage.
Who you going with?
I'm going to go with Alex Smith going up against Atlanta. They give up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. It's going to be a shootout in that game. We know Atlanta's high-scoring offense can put up points. The Chiefs kind of struggle on the road, so they're probably going to be playing catch-up most of the game. Smith's going to have to throw the ball a lot. That Atlanta defense has played well, but they also are a little susceptible to a big play here or there, so that may help Smith out. But really, I just think that Atlanta's going to be able to shut down the run game. Spencer Ware still a little banged up. Alex Smith's going to have to win that game for KC if they want to win the football game. And Matty Ice has been rock solid this year again. Him and Julio. I know you said Julio's been a little inconsistent, but if he goes out and puts up anything, the Chiefs are going to be trying to chase him down. Smith's going to have to put up points for them to compete in this football game.
Yeah, you said he's going to have to be passing a lot. He actually has 31 or more passing attempts in 3 straight games now, so they are starting to pass a little bit more. And like we mentioned before, I think it has something to do with Tyreek Hill, man. This dude is stepping into a big role on this offense, and he's helping Alex Smith out as well. You look, 2 weeks ago, in week 11, Alex Smith had 24 fantasy points versus Tampa Bay. That was one of his better games this season because really Alex Smith hasn't been that great either this season. And then last week, they go into Denver, one of the better defenses in football, and he went up and put 16 points up, which isn't great or anything, but that's in Denver's a tough game. So now he's going into Atlanta, one of the easier defenses to pass against. So I think Alex Smith can come up with 20 plus in this game.
Get some.
2 receivers here. One for the Minnesota Vikings, that is Adam Thielen, and he's going up against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, Dallas, they have a pretty solid defense, but they're much better at stopping the run than they are the pass. They actually led up the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers this year. And Stephon Diggs is still a little bit banged up. He missed last week, and Thielen came up with a pretty solid game. Now, Diggs is expected back this week, and he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver, obviously. But Thielen's really the number 2 out there, and with Diggs out, he had 11 targets. Usually he sees around 5 or 6 targets, I'd say. And he sees high percentage targets. He's caught 45 passes out of his 61 targets this season. And really, he's been pretty solid over the past month. 4 straight double-digit fantasy performances, and he's even better at home. This is going to be a home game. Over his last 2 home games, 9 catches, 133 yards, and a touchdown combined. And Diggs was playing in those games. So you can see, even with Diggs back, Thielen can get it done. And like I said, Cowboys, I think they're going to be able to stop the run pretty well. That's going to force Sam Bradford to pass. And he completes a high number of passes this season. So I think Thielen can put up solid numbers this week.
The driver I've been working with at UPS today was a Minnesota Vikings fan. I told him they were garbage. He agrees that Sam Bradford's garbage.
Well, obviously, no one's going to go out and say Sam Bradford's awesome. But he, like I just mentioned, he's been completing a high number of passes this season. Just nothing big.
Believe it.
All right, the last guy is wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers, Jeremy Curley, and he is going into Chicago this week. They led up the second most fantasy points to wide receivers. He's had some solid fantasy performances this season, but they've come few and far between, really. 4 times this season he went into double digits, and 7 times under double digits, obviously. But when he does get double digits, he's put up at least 19 points in 3 of those 4 times, and each of the last 3 times. He's had at least 6 targets in all but 2 games this season as well, so he's getting the looks. He's just not, he doesn't have a great team around him, especially a quarterback, but Kaepernick is starting to improve moderately. He looks a little bit better than Gabbert in terms of fantasy at least, but Gabbert did like Curley a little bit more, and Kaepernick really isn't throwing to Curley as much as Gabbert was, because Gabbert's more of a check down guy, whereas Colin Kaepernick will take some chances, and that's not really who Jeremy Curley is. He's not the big play guy. But I think going up against this Chicago team that really doesn't have a good pass defense, they're pretty solid at stopping the run at least. I think Kaepernick's going to have to pass a good bit in his game, and Curley will at least come up with 5 catches.
Kaepernick's playing better as of late, too, so that'll help Curley out.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. He is, but he's really not looking his way.
Maybe he will this week.
Like I said, he's going to have to be passing a lot in this game. I think Chicago, you really have to pass against them. Yeah, I just hope that Barkley can put up some points to force San Francisco to keep passing.
Barkley, dude's garbage.
But that's it. Overall, man, we're averaging 13.15 points per non-quarterback this season, and that's almost 100 players.
Ball. It's because our fantasy coverage is the best anywhere, ever. It's tremendous. It's bigly. It's the most bigly fantasy coverage in the history of all fantasy coverage.
You're starting to cut out a little bit, man. Wrap it up.
All right, fans, any questions or comments you have, hit us up on Twitter at bet_the_spread. Hit me up on Twitter at betjimthewin. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/betthespread. Fantasy playoffs. I'm in it in both leagues. I'm going to beat Dash.